Hi, I'm James Maguire, and our topic today is governing big data, making sense of all your data analytics procedures. To talk about that, I'm joined by three thought leaders. With us is Aaron Kalb, Director of Product at Alation. Hi, Aaron. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, James?
Good, good. And why don't you give us the 11-second elevator pitch as to what Alation does? I'm not sure everyone knows.
Absolutely. So Alation is a data catalog. So what we do is we crawl and index all the data sources inside your enterprise so that data consumers can find relevant data, understand what it means, and trust it so they can put it to use.
Excellent. It seems like there's definitely a need for that. Also with us is Sue Geuens, who is a data governance specialist with the InfoData group. Hello to you, Sue.
Hi, good evening. Well, apart from that, I'm also the president of DAMA International. So,
okay.
That's our international data management organization, membership, lots of membership. We have the data management body of knowledge, a certification in data management. So my day job, I do data governance. My night job, I do this DAMA thing.
Excellent. Okay. Also with us is Mike Matchett, analyst with the Toneja group. Hello to you, Mike.
How you doing today, Jim?
Good. And I know you cover data analytics from many different standpoints.
Yeah, we've been studying big data and all things storage and data management from the sort of enterprise infrastructure perspective, historically for a couple decades now as Toneja Group, and I focus a lot on what happens when you bring that big data in and do analytics on it, and you have to persist it and store it and replicate it and protect it, and of course govern it. So try to bring a little industry perspective here today.
Nice. Okay. So what does it mean actually to govern big data? And if you can talk about perhaps one or more, but really one sort of best practice in terms of governing big data. What should companies be aware of? Aaron, what's your take on that?
Sure, I might not be the right person to have go first, since we see this a little bit differently at Alation, maybe than the standard. But
Yep.
So really, to some people, governance is really about defining policies, and then there's this process of stewardship of putting that into practice, ensuring that all data is carefully annotated with how it should and shouldn't be used, what's, for example, personally identifiable information, what's high quality, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And at Alation, we definitely believe in that more traditional approach, but we also think a lot about what's going to actually have the impact on the consumer. So the governance metaphor we often use is think about how to get people to drive correctly, right? There might be a DMV driver's test, and someone has to write the handbook and write that test, and have people take it. But what's really going to change behavior are just-in-time interventions like stoplights and speed limits that are posted. And at Alation, we're all about trying to make that, putting those policies into action.
Right. Okay. So you're talking about actually putting policies into action, but heck, I'm this, company A. I just want to plug in a bunch of numbers and get insights to help me drive sales. I mean, I'm going to put policies in place. Oh my God. Okay. That never occurred to me.
That's exactly right. That I think there can sometimes be a perceived tension between analysts and data scientists who want to move fast and get insights and drive revenue, and people in a more traditional governance or IT role who are trying to do risk mitigation.
Yes.
And what we've observed is the thing that they share is analysts want to be fast, the governance and IT folks want to be compliant, but everybody wants accuracy.
Right.
And so we find that if you really make that the sort of central point, like how can we make sure all this data, if we know what it is and where it comes from and whether it's good and trustworthy, that can be something that's central to both those constituencies.
Mm-hmm. So what's your take? What does it mean to govern big data, and what is a best practice for governing big data?
So I there's a couple of things I agree with Aaron about, and like we do talk about policies and data stewards and all of those good things and compliance. But what we miss when we focus on that is we miss the opportunity that huge amounts of data can give us. And what I think in terms of best practice is that balance of, yes, we need to comply. Yes, we need to know what our data is, where it is, what it's about, what's the context of it. But once we know that, we have a lot better idea of making that data live and work for us. So data governance for me is that balance. It's not we're only going to focus on the compliance. We're only going to focus on the punishment side almost. We want to get to the stage where, and a great example here in Europe, we're sort of focusing on GDPR, and everybody's like looking at GDPR, and you can see the panic in everybody's eyes.
What is GDPR?
You know,
So what is GDPR?
So GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation.
Okay.
So it's a European regulation which says if you have data that's personally identifiable, you need to manage it according to this regulation, if any of this data belongs to any citizen of the EU. So pretty much that, it's enormous. It's so broad. And in the US, if you kind of go, well, we're in the US, we don't care, we don't have personally identifiable data. Sorry, you do, number one, and two, you have it about Europeans. Therefore, you might as well, give up and actually manage your data appropriately. But this is a really big thing, and you're getting lots of people with that sort of like deer in the headlights look about it right now. And one of the things I'm trying to do in the Wormer and all the rest of it is get people to understand this isn't something to be afraid of. This is an enormous opportunity to look at the data we've got, understand what it is, and really use it. And, in terms of your data science and your analytics and stuff, imagine if you actually knew what your data was and you didn't have to guess, and then you make all of these big reports, and most of them are wrong because you've guessed what you're doing. So that for me is the best practice to balance.
But Sue, I hate to break this to you. I know you're living in Europe, but we here in America don't believe in regulating anything. So it's just like if you can get the data and make money off it, that's what matters. The regulation stuff just slows us down. So I know that's not a European outlook, but I just want to break that to you.
Well, you know what? You can regulate while you're making money. At the end of the day,
okay.
you need to. Yeah. I mean, the regulation is about knowing where your data is, knowing what your data is, and actually looking after it appropriately. If you want to make money, the best way to make money is to do it right the first time. How many times do you actually have to redo your analytics and your calculations because you've got it wrong because you have the wrong data? So you know what? I'm sorry. Put on your big girl panties, do the compliance, and actually get value from your data.
I like it.
Sorry. I'll be a good girl and I'll be quiet for a second.
Mike, what's your sense? What does it mean to actually govern big data, and what might be a best practice for governing big data?
Yeah, I'm sure I can distill this down to just one thing.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. Right. Without being too flip.
Right.
I think one of the things that people should automatically think of when they think of big data and they're thinking of volume and variety and velocity, they should be thinking of veracity. And we've looked at that for a long time and saying, you just got to start thinking about data as something where you know what it is and you can show its provenance and you know whether it's true or not and where it comes from. I was a military intelligence officer a long time ago. And in addition to classifying information and stamping a certain kind of security clearance on it, one of the things you also should have been doing with that information is also stamping it with a rating of how believable it was or how much you could prove it to be true. Mm-hmm. That is always an assessment. And I think that's even truer today now that we put all this big data together, is you have to have some understanding of the source of the data, where it's coming from, how long it's updated, all those things. And people who are data scientists running off with their machine learning and throwing things in Google Cloud get to these black box results and then come back later on and someone says, well, what data did you use? What did you put in the top of that black box? And they go, what the black box does, I certainly don't know where that data came from that I put into it. And if you don't know anything along those steps, you're in big trouble. So I think just the best practice is don't let data scientists who are thinking, and I think this was brought up before, but running towards that, you're getting that prediction line to 90% saying, hey, this is great because we found some optimization benefit by doing this. Run the show completely. You have to be able to go back, and not just for compliance reasons, but you have to be able to go back. We can talk about ethics, privacy, certainly meeting compliance law, but even just getting it right is going to be a problem if you don't understand that data. So that's what I would say is do that. And if I could add one more thing, and you can
Please.
cut this during
No,
during your editing,
please. Okay, yeah.
if you want. But I think it's interesting as you bring up the talks about compliance. And in this country, we're having a big problem right now with sort of a clash of confusion as to whether what we're seeking are freedoms to do what we want. Remove regulation and allowing people to capitalize on information and resources and do what they want, versus and the freedom that you get from owning your own data and holding it private and secure and being able to have that freedom. So where's the understanding of what freedom means? And I think
there's a tension there for sure. Yeah.
And so I think that has to be really hashed out. And I Sue probably has a lot more to add on this. There's probably half a book to write on this, on the balancing of opportunity cost with individual freedoms and rights and so on. But I think that is definitely a wide open concept today. So enterprises entering into this fray really are going to have to. They really should be laying a groundwork to implement any kind of policy that emerges out of this, right? We're plowing new ground, and new rules and regulations are going to keep coming out, and we don't know where it's going to end up 5-10 years from now. But the more data you're accumulating, the more it's going to pay to have metadata and abilities to implement policies and have this provenance today. So,
I may relate. I made up a question there. Tell me if this question makes any sense, but I want to ask it whether or not it makes sense. Like big data quality, how do you manage data quality? Is that first of all, does that question make any sense? And if it does, please answer it.
Totally.
Okay. What's your take on that?
So I think there's a lot of ways to look at data quality. I think the idea of veracity and trustworthiness, like Mike was saying, makes total sense.
Right.
So there's a bunch of ways to look at that. So one is to say, let's look at the values, right? If we're saying, date of birth,
right,
and enormous spike at age 47, that could be because the null values in some ETL transfer got defaulted to January 1st, 1970.
Right.
And it's not because that's actually what made people are, it's just the way the data is skewed.
Right.
Or there could be someplace in the pipeline that breaks so things get stale, or certain records could be duplicated from multiple sources in a M&A kind of situation. There's 100 reasons why the data can be wrong that you might be able to tell from profiling the values. You might be able to tell from looking at the lineage and the provenance. All of that is super helpful, and this is a big part of what Alation tries to surface from the data layer. Mm-hmm. The thing that I think is interesting to look at too, though, is people are a great source of information about accuracy and quality. And the analogy I would draw is to Google. So before Google, the way search engines worked, if I want to know if something is relevant to a keyword that I type, is I see how often that keyword occurs in the content relative to the other words.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that's looking at the data itself, not the metadata on the usage, right? So back with, Alta Vista or something like that, you would see a lot of results that weren't very good, in the same way that a restaurant might say, best tasting food. That might not be true. What you want to see is the big line at the door. Are people in there enjoying it? Are people on Yelp saying good things? And
not
Google
keyword stuffing. Right.
Exactly right. So what Google did was they said, we're going to look at the behavior. What do people know? Instead of interviewing hundreds of people, though, about which website is the best website about dogs or about medicine, they instead looked at the links they were already making. People were doing behavior already, and you could mine that behavior. Exactly right. So in the way we would look at the world is we say, okay, what are the things people are doing with data, the activities in their day-to-day life that show their preferences and their sense of quality. So if the best analysts are all creating their dashboards using this particular data set, and there's other data set that no one's using or only some summer intern is using, that can be a good indication as to what's high quality. So I think quality, you can look at both the content, the provenance, and the usage downstream as inputs into that process. And we use the idea of data curation as being the task of taking all those inputs and kind of making that final amalgamation, a human judgment for what's good and what's not.
So do you believe there is such a thing as managing big data quality? I think about, systems that suck up enormous fields of data, structured, unstructured data. And it's like the more the merrier. Is managing big data quality, does it make sense? What is it?
Yeah, I think
I should ask Sue just because Sue, what is your take on that?
So absolutely, I keep getting asked, well, I keep getting told by all the big data gurus who say, yeah, we've got so much data, we actually don't need to do quality on it.
Right.
We've got so much that the sheer volume will even out the data quality curve. And I'm like, well, okay, if you've got 3 billion records of data, and of those 3 billion, 2.99 billion actually have great email addresses as an example, then you're right. Anything that's wrong will actually fall out. However, when you have bad data quality already, then you are going to have a problem. You're absolutely going to have an issue, and you have to look at your quality. You've got to decide. I think you have to actively go, yes, I realize I've got big data sets, but I've done a little bit of analysis. I've tried to pull some stuff out, and my results are not what I'm expecting. And trust me, a good data person knows the results they're expecting. It is something, it's almost a gut feel that we have, that we can look at and we can say, no, that's not right. And when you're looking at that and you're looking at your data and you're going, that isn't right, it's time to look at the quality. Absolutely time to look at the quality. And right. I don't care how big your data is. We've had big data for years. Don't let anybody con you into this as a new thing. We've right. had enormous tons of data lying all over the place for a long time. So right. in the new buzzword.
How else have those large database companies been in business if we haven't had massive stores of data for years, if not decades? But let me use the E word, ethics.
Exactly.
Mike, ethics in big data, it's almost like it's an amazingly hot potato issue. I mean, what role does ethics play? But I guess the real question is, are companies really thinking in terms of ethics in big data? Yeah.
So of course that's a leading question, because
it is very much so.
Obviously nowhere near enough companies are thinking about ethics the way they should be, right. And big data does compound the problem. That just to give a few kind of broad brush examples, without going over things that are in the popular press. Everyone today is concerned with the discussion between artificial intelligence and sentience maybe taking over the world, and is that a good or bad thing? And people are arguing back and forth. I'm going, you're missing the point there. We don't have artificial intelligence today. It's probably not going to happen that way. What you should be more concerned with is machine learning and how that's being used, because what people are doing is saying, let me take this big mass of data and draw a pattern out of it using some mathematical algorithm, and then apply that pattern as if it was the rule of law, and there's no recourse or insight or judgment or even defense of what that algorithm is coming up with. It's not only the algorithm is a black box to most people, although you can study those things in terms of probabilities and that, but the application of that is beyond the realm of most business folks when they get that prediction line.
The application of what?
Of a machine learning recommendation, for example.
Okay.
If you're not the data scientist that built it and understand the variations and the probabilities and the things, and it goes back to the data. If you don't know what data went into it, you can't draw a good conclusion. But what we're finding today is people are putting these things into practice, selling them as services to others who just put blind faith into it. So people are losing their jobs or not getting a job based
right.
upon the zip code they're in because of some big data pattern.
Mm-hmm.
There have been teachers who have been fired because the wrong data went into the systems, and it was a third party, and there was no recourse, legal or otherwise, to even go and argue what data did you use? How did
right.
you come up with this pattern?
Mm-hmm.
It was just a blind recommendation. We know that the way a lot of is going, it's going to be machine learning driven, and if the machine learning algorithm is only 90% or so on, that may be better than a human could do in real time, but that leaves that 10% hanging out there. And I'm not talking just about being suboptimal, but I'm talking about actually re-implementing things that are prejudicial, things that are
mm-hmm. right.
that are actually against our civil liberties and against our laws in this country, as well as possibly impinging on human rights worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
When you do this. So I think there's great ethical considerations, and I wouldn't just say itself, but I would say what big data is getting used for, which is in creating these machine learning and optimization things. We got to be really careful with that part going forward.
Right. I mean, there's a really, obviously it's not a stretch to say that, big data and sort of an Orwellian state are pretty close to each other, or could be pretty close to each other. Aaron, do you see, what do you see in the area of ethics and big data? Are companies aware of it? Are they thinking about it? Are they worried about it, or are they mainly running right over it?
Yeah, I think obviously, like individuals, companies fall along a broad spectrum in terms of how much they're concerned with ethics versus, more of a get-rich-quick mentality.
Right.
And like you said, there's cultural norms that might differ in Europe versus the U.S. in terms of how we think about freedom to versus freedom from, and that sort of thing. But just to build on what Mike was saying, I think there's a risk, but also an opportunity. So obviously the risk comes from an application where the decision's being made entirely by the computer in a way that could be either mistaken, or that could be reinforcing an existing bias, right? So just to spell out, I think Michael did this really well, but a particular example, let's say that I look at the hiring decisions that human hiring managers make based on interviews, and I try to have that process be automated by looking at a bunch of different features and variables from a survey or LinkedIn profile or whatever else. Well, if there's a bias based on gender or race or something like that, even a subconscious bias in the humans, that bias is going to be encoded in the training data, and therefore that bias is going to be put into that algorithm. But the opportunity is to say, big data could be a tool to correct that instead of to reinforce that. For example, if there's less bias in performance evaluation, how you're actually doing on the job, than there is when you're looking at somebody and saying, oh, they don't look like the kind of person who can do this job, I'm going to judge them. If you trained on that, you could actually take humans who are biased, and instead of replace them with a computer that has the same biases and is biased faster, because it's a computer, it could be something that isn't biased because it's actually able to look at what the real evidence shows instead of just what the assumptions are. So I think I see a mixture of companies who are thinking about how to have big data and machine learning be a tool for good, folks who aren't thinking about it that much at all, and I hope we'll see a trend toward the former.
Are you saying that, say, for example, a program that might be searching for applicants, that human bias could be built into the actual searching mechanism? Or maybe I didn't understand you. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, if the basic machine learning model is you take a bunch of data in the world, right? So you say, okay, given these inputs, how do we weight them to predict the output? And if that output is being done in a subjective way that has biases in it, the computer is going to naturally replicate that rather than overcome it.
Right.
And if you have somebody doing the pre-big data model, the more kind of rule-based algorithms, if that person in charge of the algorithm knows the law and knows cognitive biases and everything else, they could make sure that they never take into account race or gender, things that are correlated with that in their algorithm very conscientiously. If you just say we're going to do unsupervised machine learning and the bulk of the big data will solve the problem, it won't solve that problem. It'll just continue.
Yeah. So you're our token European, and so we have to ask you about ethics too. And we know that you may have a different view on us, but what is your take on big data and ethics? Are companies really there with it, or is it mainly being ignored in the rush to profits?
I think here in Europe, we're probably a lot more conscious of the ethics. I think generally as a culture, we're sort of more formal, we're a little bit more reserved. We're more, I think, open to considering that ethics is something that we've got to take notice of. And of course, I mean, part of that is whether we like it or not, we are being driven by the data protection acts that are around and the GDPR. That tells you you've got to handle your data ethically. We've got to handle our data morally. So whether we want to or not, there's an enormous compliance drive towards it, and organizations who have taken that to heart and are really doing it are the organizations where ethics is already there, and they're already looking at it and going, all right, so if I want to use big data, how can I use it? How can I get value out of it? But how can I not tread on anybody else's toes? So it's there. And yeah, absolutely, I'm with Aaron and Mike. There are organizations organizations who are not doing it and who are doing their damnedest to avoid anything that could be sort of smack of any kind of ethics. But in general, I think there's a big drive. And again, from my perspective of DAMA International, our new body of knowledge came out at the end of June, and we have a chapter on ethics, data ethics in that book. And it's probably, it's kind of quite rare at this stage to have it written down about it, but we decided that this was a topic that was really close to our heart, and that we needed to bring to the fore. It doesn't matter what you do, as a data management person or an organization that handles data, you have a duty and a responsibility to use that data appropriately and to consider what the outcome is if you do not. One of my clients that I'm working with has the most insanely sensitive data about people. And if this data got out, it could effectively destroy lives. And I mean, it would individually destroy lives, which in a way is harder than data that just literally is let loose in hundreds of millions. A lot of the data breaches are millions of records. These could actively destroy individuals' lives. So we have to think about it. We have to be realistic. And as data management people, data management professionals, we have a duty to make sure that if there is something being done unethically, we actually call it out. We step up and we say, guys, there is a problem. You cannot continue to do this. And we have to be the ethical evangelists, whether we like that or not. Just to be the right person, to have a profession that we're proud of, we need to do that.
Good point. Yeah, Mike, what's your take? Looking to the future, say we're having this conversation in the year 2022. We're just not that far from now, and we're talking about big data governance. What will be all settled by then? What will still be an issue then? Whether it's ethics, whether it's procedure, whether it's logistics. What is the future of big data governance? In several years from now.
So I'm gonna talk about two things that may just go around the edges of that, and
Gotcha.
let Sue and Aaron talk about the core that is more the
Sure.
bailiwick. But
Right.
one thing I've been looking at is, with big data, you can mask out PII fields, personally identifying information out of one data set and out of another and out of another. But the trick with big data is you can put all that data together and reverse engineer back personally identifying information if you got big enough data sets.
Okay.
And I don't know how to engineer our way out of that, because it's a very difficult thing to say, I'm going to get the benefits of big data by pulling all this data together, and if I mask all the individual identifying information upstream, I should be okay. But then to realize that in the final product, when I put it together, I basically can reassemble information, and this hits on ethics and it hits on data quality and some other things. So that I'm not sure how we engineer our way out of by 2020, because I think our power of analytics only goes up by then, and our power to draw conclusions. And I think the box only gets smarter in that sense of being able to create a thing. So that's one concern I have, is I think that just gets to be a more difficult problem as we go along. The second one I think people are going to face that they're not necessarily aware of is what I've been calling a data paucity, or poverty of data. And that is, you might be a company or a startup coming along now and saying, I got this great idea and I can do this and this and change the world and improve everyone's lives, but I need access to that and that data. The supply chain, I don't get it. I can't have that data, and we haven't quite seen that yet, but I think that's coming for some folks who say, like, I've got a way to really improve that, and I don't have the rights to get into that. I don't have the money to buy into that supply chain of data from folks. Data itself is becoming a currency, if you will, and I think a lot of folks who are sort of saying, like, no, big data just makes the world better. We're going to find out that once we become more of an information market, and you have to buy and sell and get access to that data, that becomes its own challenge. And even in specific, if I make a widget and I even make it an IoT widget, for example, so an Internet of Things thing, so it generates its own little data, but I sell that downstream to people who embed it in larger and larger objects. Who has the rights to the data coming off that widget? Who's going to get access to that data? Are they going to get all the context needed to understand that? And that just becomes a huge, I think, a much bigger problem as we get to 20 billion, 20 200 billion, 20 trillion Internet of Things objects generating data by 2020, right? So this is not a today problem necessarily, but by 2020, I think the data flows and this kind of a bigger and bigger issue.
Mm-hmm. Aaron, your take on the future of data governance, or perhaps big data itself and the world of IoT? Yeah, what's your take?
Well, I think, what's really cool is, being on this panel, a couple of years ago, we really felt like when we said, oh, data governance is about quality, it's about empowering analytics instead of just preventing misuse. Mm-hmm. We sort of felt like that wasn't really resonating with a lot of people. And now I'm hearing Sue and Mike talk and sort of saying the exact same things. It's all about finding, understanding, and accuracy. So I think already we're trending toward something I hope will continue to 2020, which is thinking about it more holistically and more collaboratively, instead of as an adversarial relationship between sort of the data users and the data controllers. Mm-hmm. I think it'll become more of a curation and consumption market where there's a lot of mutual benefit. And I think there's a few types where like data really cannot be misused. And as Sue mentioned, there's certain use cases where the data falling into the wrong hands could be truly devastating. But mostly incentives are really aligned, right? Getting access to data that is accurate, that is trustworthy, being able to find that. Most people also want to use it correctly. So you can think about it almost like going to the supermarket and being told, this contains nuts. Eat it, only if you're not allergic, but we're not going to forbid it, right? Kind of find a balance where it's informed consent and aligned incentives. And I think that's philosophically what's going to happen. And obviously I have a bias, but I think tools like data catalogs will become the marketplace for going between these two roles, people who know about data, people who are going to use the data, so that you can both avoid that downside risk of a lawsuit or something even worse, while also getting that benefit of leveraging that data to make better decisions, better products, make people's lives better. So hopefully that clarifies a bit.
It makes sense. So you're taking the future, and there's something that I think maybe Mike and perhaps even Aaron said that it created this image in my mind of like the future of big data may be affected by the haves versus have-nots. In other words, getting access to the data is going to take more and more money. And so the competitive edge of big data, which will be ever more important, will be available only to those with large amounts of money.
I hope that's not the case.
Yeah.
I think actually what we'll see is just as things like Google and the first web browsers like Netscape made the cost both in money and technical know-how of getting access to information get lower. Mm-hmm. I think we'll actually see a data democratization in the coming years through things like data catalogs that will help people in organizations and across get access to the data. Mm-hmm. For that to happen, there'll need to be assurance through both GDPR and other lenses that nothing get leaked. But I think if you're in a safe environment where you can sort of self-serve, a good example is the Amazon marketplace, right? I can do a keyword search and see many products and many vendors, but I get those star ratings, and Amazon makes sure that we're not selling poison to kids or anything. So it's kind of a nice environment where it's safe to self-serve.
Sue, your take on the future of data governance? What are we going to be talking about several years from now on this topic?
So I think that the one thing that we as data management people kind of forget is that we're already, we're in data management, we're doing data governance, we're doing big data, we're doing all of those things. There is a generation of youngsters, people coming up behind us with incredibly different attitudes towards data. Now, if you have teenagers or you have access to a bunch of teenagers, I challenge you to go and spend a couple of hours watching them and watching how they work with their stuff, how they work with their technology, how they work with the data that they actually are having. They multitask and they share and they do all sorts of things, but they do it in a very targeted fashion. And I have a suspicion that 5-10 years' time, we'll be sitting on our rocking chairs looking at this and going, wow, we never saw that coming. I think there's going to be an explosion of a lot of self-service and a lot of different ways of looking at data. I think that people are going to get more intelligence about their own data. Typically you go into an organization data and it's either, well, the CDO owns it, or the organization owns it, or I'm the department in charge of marketing, I own it. Actually, no. Who owns the data? The person whose data it is. I own my data. You own your data. And the generation coming up behind us know that. They know that, and they're not going to let organizations take charge of their data. So I think that, yes, governance is going to happen, but I think it's going to be a different kind of governance. I think that the rise of a generation of people who already know and are intelligent enough to know how important their data is in the world, they're going to manage things very differently. I'm actually quite interested to be able to sit back in 10 years' time and go, okay, now kids, I want to see what you make of this. You know, things like GDPR, there is a part of me that's going, I wonder if it's going to exist in 10 years' time. I absolutely wonder.
You mean because it won't be needed? Or why?
I don't know that we'll need it.
Wow, that's a highly optimistic.
Because those teenagers, those teenagers are a hell of a lot brighter than we give them credit for, and they think differently to us. We are still of the, oh my God, let's look after it and protect it. Whereas they're almost of the mindset of, well, it's mine. I'll protect it the way I want, and I may choose to share it with you. But when I do, watch out, because if you mess it up, here I come. And they're like that, you know. So, you know, I have an unusual view. I do get that.
Right. I want to believe you're right about that. And certainly, you know, younger people today are more tech savvy than maybe we would have been, perhaps when we were like that age. On the other hand, they're more immersed than we ever were at that age. And you think about, you know, everything gets posted to Instagram. Is the average 16-year-old making such a careful decision about what she posts to Instagram? So that, you know, suddenly their data is not as freely available out there.
Yeah, so they are making that decision, because if you challenge them and you turn around and say to them, hey, teenager A or Joe or Peter or whatever, you do realize that this is not private, and everybody who's got access to you can see it and they can pass it on. And there's an attitude of, yes, I know, I chose to do it. Okay. You know, we are, oh my God, don't let that picture go out. And another challenge I see, and I hate to bring it up, but Facebook, you know, I keep telling people, if you want to post something on Facebook, please remember that you can't get rid of it. I don't care what Facebook says, they don't delete data. Therefore, if you post a picture of yourself drunk and disorderly on a Saturday night, it's out there forever. Okay. And I'm kind of going, I don't want to do that, because what if my possible new job, the boss there goes and happens to go on Facebook and has a look and sees me drunk and disorderly on a Saturday night in my own time? What if he won't hire me? Okay. Whereas a teenager is going, if that dude comes along and actually looks at me on a Saturday night, that's his problem, because it's my time off. As long as I get to work on time, I do my job properly, who cares what I do on a Saturday night? A big change of mindset. And this is going to change how data is used in the future. All right. Well, it's just, yeah. No, sorry.
I'm with you. No, that's this. You know, I get your point. And on that, I see the clock. The big clock is telling us we are more or less out of time. I feel like I've learned a lot. I thank the three of you for your expertise. I'll send you the link when we're all, you know, when it's all done. We can all tweet about it. And I thank you very much.